rocking the booth. We're mugging for life, we're mugging for truth. Smaulgld here, and he's spitting the facts about the public community and the way that they act. We're mugging for life, we ain't playing the games. We all know the lies and we all know the names. Come on. Mugging for life. Mugging for life. Smaulgld.
Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is Monday the 3rd of June 2019. Welcome mug stackers and game changers. It is Monday night mugging for life. And tonight's topic, tech giants and Trump political foes face government scrutiny. Scrutiny, not scrutiny, but government scrutiny. And today it was announced, but not very scant details about some Department of Justice and FTC investigations. And let me give you the companies that are involved. Facebook, Apple, Google, Amazon, and Trump specifically called out AT&T today. And I'm going to explain what these companies are possibly being looked at. Some of it has to do with antitrust. But a lot of this fits into a bigger overall scheme. If you remember the first 2.5 years of Trump's presidency, he has been attacked as a Russian agent, and now they're going after for collusion. But the Mueller probe is over. That attempt to take him down has failed. They're still trying the remnants of it on the obstruction charge. It's really not going to go anywhere. In order for this to work now, it has to be impeachment, and impeachment requires a 2/3 vote in the Senate. And unless there's some information out there that we are unaware of, that's not going to happen. All the information that we have to date did not lead to the main charge, which would be if Trump had colluded with Russia, then he probably would have been impeached because he would be viewed as a traitor. But given that that has turned out not to be the case, and there's a lot of evidence that indeed he might have been set up, that's not going to happen. And then the second issue is, well, did he obstruct justice in proclaiming his innocence so vehemently? And the problem there is you have to have corrupt intent, and trying to get your innocence out there is generally not deemed to be obstruction. So that's probably not going to happen. Now, anyone who knows Trump knows that he is vindictive, crude, crass, and so on. And I don't think he's taken kindly to all of this. In fact, you could tell when he has an issue with somebody hits him, he hits them back harder. Today he called the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, a stone-cold loser. So he's definitely, and he also told the Labour Party that if they win, that the United States is going to have to reconsider their intelligence sharing with Great Britain. So we know that Trump has broken the mold, and he will take revenge. Now, first we're going to talk about these tech giants. Now, this is really going to be law and politics. Now, you don't ever study that in law school. You study antitrust law. You don't study antitrust law and politics. But much of the law, it's always been this way, but you see it in current events, and you think that the politics has been added to the law. Actually, what the politics does is it, in many respects, it corrupts the law. So, for example, the way Comey and Mueller have behaved have been absolutely political, breaking protocol, changing standards from gross negligence to extremely careless. For Comey, both Mueller and Comey exonerated or thought that that was their job as FBI agents and special counsel to exonerate subjects. That's not what they're supposed to do. The standard is you either make a charge or you don't. If you make a charge, you bring out all the information. If you're not going to bring a charge, you keep your trap shut. But in any event, I want to get into that now. What I want to talk about is where we are now as a result of all this. The Mueller probe, as I mentioned, is over. The Democrats will try to do the impeachment process. That's destined to fail, and that's a political loser anyway. It may rile up people who want to see him frog marched out of the White House. But that's never going to happen. That's not going to happen. So that actually is a waste. And if you recall, when the Republicans impeached Bill Clinton, they had a special counsel's report that actually made findings that Bill Clinton was guilty of certain crimes like obstructing of justice, suborning, perjury, and he lost his law license. But the Senate did not vote, despite the special counsel's findings, did not vote to remove him from office. Well, in this case, there's been no findings at all. So it's going to be even harder to remove a president who hasn't been found, or there's only been innuendo of wrongdoing. That's not enough to get the Senate to convict on a 2/3, especially when Republicans have 54 of the Senate. So now we're in stage 2. This is blowback time, and I think that these recent Amazon, Facebook, pretty much announced today over the weekend, there's been hints about it, AT&T and Google, all part of that. Now, let's go through each company and see why, from a legal perspective, that these companies might be in the crosshairs with the Department of Justice or the Federal Trade Commission, and why they might be in the crosshairs politically. Let's start with Amazon. Now, Amazon is a large retailer, the original e-tailer. They have the most efficient, perhaps, retail operation that ever existed. They have robots working in their warehouses. They can ship things to you. They work with the post office flawlessly. They have tremendous return policies. They often have the best prices. They've got a wide selection of things. They either can sell themselves and fulfill themselves. They have a big affiliate program. You basically can't get anything on Amazon. You can get it quickly. You can get it at a decent price. That is a result of their investment in technology, understanding the customer, putting customer service first. Those are all things that will make a company successful. So you say, great, where's the harm? Now, some people, under antitrust law, the general rule is you don't have to have harm to a competitor. You have to have harm to competition. And just because a company, through dint of its superior foresight, business acumen, creates a better product and gains a monopoly, there's nothing wrong with that. If the customer is being served by a superior product at a lower price, it doesn't matter that they put everyone out of business. In a sense, that's what competition does. If Amazon does better than your local grocer, all things considered equal, well then Amazon wins, and there's no crime, there's no antitrust violation. The Amazon company may have a monopoly, but the issue for antitrust law is, does the company that has attained a monopoly, because having a monopoly is not illegal. In fact, all companies try to attain a monopoly if they can, and if they manage to get it, the only issue they now have, which is a big issue though, is whether they're engaged in monopolistic practices. Meaning, are they abusing their dominant market position? So, and by definition, almost being a monopoly, you're going to abuse it. It's just like a giant walking around a bunch of mice. Just being a giant isn't a problem, but if you step on mice, then there is a problem. So what the problem with Amazon is, it's not as clean cut as, well, they just have the best products and they have the best service and they have the best prices, and that's why they're on top. Part of the reason they're on top is they support this entire retail operation with profits that they make from their cloud services. And you say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, there is, because at least from the government's perspective, for antitrust perspective, is Amazon isn't really winning on the merits and isn't really winning on competition, because in order to provide this wonderful service at these low prices, they're losing money to do it. Now, if there was no other business that Amazon had, and I wrote a law review paper on this, you would say, well, they're engaged in predatory pricing. Now, predatory pricing means that you sell your product below cost to drive out your competitors, and by keeping the prices low, you gain all of the customers and your competitors go out of business. In an article I wrote, that generally doesn't work. because that's almost a waste of money. And no one's really harmed by it. You say, well, the businesses go out of business. So, yeah, but the customers got the lower prices during the time period of the predatory pricing. So Amazon comes out, they sell everything less than everybody else. Everyone goes out of business. Well, the problem there is the company can't keep up losses forever. So they're going to have to try to regain their losses by raising the price. Well, what's going to happen when they raise the price? The other competitors will come back in and they'll compete on price. And that'll have been a big waste of money because Amazon would have spent all that money gaining customers in order to gain market share. But they're throwing money out the window because they'll never be able to recoup their losses because other competitors will come back in once they try to raise the price. So what does Amazon do? They just continue predatory pricing. You say, well, how is that possible? How do they continue to basically give products away at below cost? Well, the answer is that they make profit elsewhere. So they can gain all those customers and actually lose money in the retail business. And I looked at their financials today and I saw they sold $31.6 billion in the last quarter worth of merchandise. That merchandise cost them $30.7 billion just to obtain. Then to fulfill it, it cost $7.792 billion. They had marketing expenses. They lost about $10 billion running in a quarter, running their retail operation. Now that can't go on forever, except they actually made money as a company, and they made it on mostly cloud services. Well, you could say, oh, that's okay. That's smart. They have another business, and if they want to support one business with the other, and remember, it's not just the money they make from the retail sales. In today's world, each customer is worth a lot of money because you gain a profile over time of that customer's buying habits and preferences. So you can sell that data or you can market to them. So it's not just a matter of making a profit on each sale. It's gaining all that customer insight, both to the individual customer, then also in the aggregate, understanding consumer behavior in certain segments of the population, certain segments of the country. So it's very important to gain that. That has a value. It's an intangible value, but it can be monetized. So even if they lose money on the sales because of their selling below cost, when you include in their expenses, it still would make sense to do it, but you'd still have to support it somehow. And no company can just absorb losses forever, except Tesla. But so what they do is they make a lot of money on cloud services. And as again, you could say, well, that's great. Then there's really, where's the harm? Where's the foul? Well, the foul is that if they're selling those cloud services to the government, like the CIA, then the government, in a sense, is subsidizing these low prices, which means they are helping Amazon put other companies out of business. Now, one could argue, well, so what? I mean, you're still getting a good price. Well, the government's actually now favoring Amazon against Walmart, against your local grocer, against other e-tailers. But I think the real issue here, because I don't think there are people who complain from a societal perspective that Amazon destroys communities. Yes, but that's part and parcel if you look at it just from an economic perspective. And you don't, it's very hard to legislate quality of life. Say, well, we have to have so many stores that are only a certain size and we can't have these Generally, the way economics works, our economies of scale, the larger a company gets, the better able they are to serve more customers at lower prices. It's inevitable. Other than boutiques, you can't compete against Amazon. And even then, they can, if they want to, they can compete as boutiques too. But in any event, the issue that you have with Amazon is really no one is harmed other than this societal concept. So from an antitrust perspective, the only issue Amazon really has is that they are holding on to their monopoly through two ways. One, they're getting the very profitable cloud services contract from the government. And two, they have a very sweetheart deal with the United States Post Office. Everyone else can't make a deal with the post office and get their stuff shipped on a Sunday, get their stuff shipped on a Saturday, get their stuff shipped in after hours, get their stuff shipped at lower prices. So Amazon is using the government in order to maintain this monopoly position. And again, you could say, but that's good for the customers. Well, the competitors may think otherwise, but again, a good portion of antitrust is not about harm to competitors, it's harm to competition. And one could argue, though, that even though the customer is not harmed, we're getting our goods and services from Amazon at a lower price, there is a harm to competition, but it's not Amazon's fault. It's the fact that Amazon has teamed up with the government, with the post office, and the cloud services. But there's a political aspect to this as well. Amazon, or the owner of Amazon, Bezos, also owns the Washington Post. Now, the Washington Post has long been known to be working with the CIA. Now you can see there's this shadowy, deep state type of connection where Amazon now knows where all the secrets are in the cloud. Amazon also knows everyone's personal shopping preferences. Amazon's working with the post office. And the Washington Post takes a very, very hard line against, guess who? Donald Trump. So, I would think in this case, I've just outlined some of the legal issues, which I don't think make Amazon... I think what you might do with Amazon is you might break up their postal arrangements. That may be unfair and anti-competitive. But what it doesn't do, it's not going to take away Amazon's ability to fulfill and source products better than anyone else. They're not doing well because of the government, but they are assisted by the government in the cloud contract and the post office deal. So Amazon, I think, is in the crosshairs mainly because they own, or Bezos owns, the Washington Post. But there's also a political element there too. Remember I talked about the societal impact, not necessarily economic, and it's very hard as a matter of law to quantify that. But you're going to have key constituents that are harmed by Amazon competitors, even though consumers may not necessarily be harmed, and they may want to see some type of action. So I'm not sure where Amazon is going to fall in all this. I think that one's a bit more political. Now, Apple is another one that was mentioned today. Now, remember, Amazon, we mentioned Washington Post. That's the thorn in their side. Apple doesn't seem to provide as much of a threat to the Trump administration as any of the others we're going to talk about, AT&T, Facebook, Google, and Amazon. But Apple has an interesting issue. And this one, I think, is from an antitrust perspective, they should be able to work something out. The issue, it appears, that they're going to go after Apple on is that Apple is the place where, and they're like a gatekeeper because they built this big platform. They've got the iPhone, the iPad, the Mac. But remember, they created all that. No one gave that to Apple. Apple is not the beneficiary. It's not like the government set it up and said, okay, you now can run Apple. Apple was somewhat of a loser company in the late 90s. They had gotten their clocks cleaned and their lunch eaten by Microsoft, and Jobs came back, Steve Jobs, and created this whole suite of products that all works seamlessly together. So by now, Apple has, at one point a couple of years ago, they were the largest market cap company in the world, and they've created this platform that's very valuable. But they've also created, there's no reason why they shouldn't, they've created certain services in which they have their own apps. So, for example, there's an iTunes app. Well, I would guess if I created this massive platform, you would think you'd be allowed to put a music app on there, a TV app. They've got Apple TV. They've got their own apps. But remember, because of the structure of these types of markets, they become platforms. And you really can't have 70 platforms. Consumers want everything in one place. So that's why there's only iOS, and you only have a few different types of phone platforms, Android, and that's it. And given that Apple has a dominant platform, they're the gatekeeper, and they call it the Apple tax, as to not only how much it's going to cost to have your app on there, but who can be on there. So here's where Apple is in the crosshairs. Politically, they can say we're not going to allow a certain app. Now, we know they have they've banned the Alex Jones app, the Gab app. So they can ban apps, and you could say, well, they're a private company, they can do what they want, and that is going to be one of the arguments. The other argument is going to be, well, no, you're a platform, one of two or three in this natural semi-monopolistic or oligopolistic marketplace where you need to provide free and fair access to anyone. When I say free and fair, I don't mean free. I mean, for a cost, you have to charge something. But even if you get to that point, it's how much is Apple allowed to charge, and whose business is it of the government to tell them how much they can charge for their services? Well, where it gets interesting is if they were to charge all the different app makers so much money to be on the platform, they wouldn't do it. It wouldn't make sense for them to be there. But what happens when a competitor, Apple, is told, well, you're going to do streaming music, that's going to cost you a bit more. Why? Because Apple's trying to protect its own iTunes product, and I think Spotify has an issue with that. They can tell a streaming video or streaming music company, you can't be on the platform. Well, if that's the case, then where does that company go? Well, one could argue they just go away. So what? If Apple iTunes provides the music, you don't need Spotify, you don't need Last.fm, you don't need Napster, you don't need any of these other music streaming services because Apple can provide it. Well, that's a harm to competition. That just then Apple iTunes will never improve if there's no competition. And since they control the platform, which to allow competition on, they're in a position where they can be deemed a monopoly who is monopolizing through abusive practices. So I think that's where they're going to look very closely at Apple. Apple has been relatively apolitical, but not totally. And of course, Apple has dealings in China. So I think that Apple is being looked at because they do have market power. And the real issue, I think, politically is the ability to keep certain apps off their platform. And I think that's one of the issues going into the 2020 election. I think that the Trump administration is very concerned about is having access to platforms, not having certain conservative commentators or just people on Facebook or Apple products, apps, or being not allowed on those platforms, and therefore having a disadvantage when it comes to getting a political message out for 2020. So that's the issue with Apple. Now, speaking of getting the message out, Google is also mentioned. And let's just see, we do have some stories. I haven't been pulling up the headlines, but we've been going through so far Amazon, Apple, and now we're going to talk about Google. Google has got an issue, and they're in the crosshairs because they have a monopoly. Now, one would argue, I actually think that unlike Apple, and actually only a company like eBay do you actually benefit from only having one platform, because a platform like eBay is all the sellers want to be where all the buyers are, and all the buyers want to be where all the sellers are. So by definition, that's going to be the dominant platform, and it doesn't make sense to have 16 eBays. Because if all the buyers want to be where all the sellers are, and all the sellers want to be where all the buyers are, you want to be on one platform. So naturally, you're going to get a one company like eBay. Now, eBay apparently is not subject to any of these issues that we're talking about. But with Google, search results, I don't think you need one search engine. It just so happens that everybody uses Google, but they don't have to. There are other search engines. But in any event, the issue with Google is going to be, they're saying, that they're looking into their search practices. Now, why are they looking into their search practices? Well, there are people who have done studies that have shown that they tend to favor certain types of stories as authoritative. And generally, those stories are what Trump would consider left-leaning or opposition. They will consider authoritative the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and that's what'll show up. And Google also owns YouTube, and YouTube's got the same issues. YouTube has a search engine, and YouTube can, and they say they've changed their algorithm. They will try to eliminate what they call fake news. They will use outside third parties to help them find hate or anti-Semitism or racism or homophobia or whatever on the site. And again, that may be deemed to be administered in a way that is political. They may think they're doing the right thing, but of course, conservatives think they're doing the right thing when they present their point of view, and liberals think they're doing the right thing when they present their point of view. Trump is considering that Google, and many do consider that Google has favored left-wing stories and has eliminated a lot of content that they deem to be fake news, when it may not necessarily be fake news. It may be news that runs counter to a more liberal narrative. So that's where Google falls into all this. And Google has the ability to, by just placement of news sources, they've done studies on this, influence what people think. And of course, I've seen it. So for example, you type in something, what Google does now, you type in something and you want to find out about some conspiracy theory and you want to read about the conspiracy theory, they show you the first 10 articles are debunking the conspiracy theory. So you never see the conspiracy theory. You basically tell, don't look at this. This is stupid. This is a conspiracy theory. And there are many examples of that where the search results are somewhat manipulated. There's talk that they've had people from Google admit all this. So this I can see being a very, very political issue. Not so much for the law. See, and this one, I think that Google has a very good legal claim. They are a search engine. If they want to adjust as part of their business, they believe one of their goals is to provide what they think is fake news free search results. And they do that however they think is possible under the business judgment rule. Governments are not supposed to tell businesses how they should run their business. If Google wants to serve up everything in a way that skews a certain perspective, you could say, well, they are a private company. They can do what they want, and they can. And the difference with Google is there's no really cost to switching. You don't have to use the Google search engine. If you think the Google search engine turns up bad stuff, well, then I don't think you need to use it. The bigger issue is YouTube, because YouTube is the same almost as eBay is. You want to be, if you're a content provider, where all the content viewers are, and the content viewers want to be where all the content providers are. Well, guess where that is? That's on YouTube. So I think there's another place where it's also politics, but the argument legally is stronger against Google with respect to its YouTube service than it is with its search results, because the YouTube platform can be deemed a platform, more of a public square, and therefore free and open access may need to be afforded to the YouTube platform. And I think that's what politically they're concerned about, is the booting of YouTube commentators that don't meet the liberal narrative, or the suppression of videos that they don't like in the YouTube search results. So Google is going to have an issue, and just like Facebook, which we're going to talk about in a second, is going to have the same issue with whether they are abusing their monopoly position, and also not just abusing their monopoly position, but whether they should be afforded platform status and be exempt from the defamation laws, which they would have if they were deemed to be a publisher. Now, in order to be a platform, it makes sense. I think you have to provide free and open access to the platform. And if you do, well, then what people put on there, you're not responsible for. You're just providing the platform. But, like, so for example, if you're a publisher, like the New York Times, they don't have that exemption. They've got other exemptions when they go after public figures. You got a higher standard in order to get them. In general, they're only talking about public figures. They're not talking about private citizens. But in the case of that 15, 16-year-old boy in D.C., who was standing down with the tribe elder from the Indian tribe, they don't have the same protection because they are a publisher and they published, which could be arguably be defamatory information, placing that boy in a false light, which is one of the types of defamation. But what Facebook and Google are considered not to be publishers. So the difference is the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, they publish news. They're not a platform. You can't go and write whatever you want on the Washington Post website. You can't. Maybe in the comment section you can, and therefore that's a platform. But you can't publish your stuff on the front page of the New York Times. You can't publish whatever you want on the Wall Street Journal, CNN. You can't go on CBS News and just publish whatever you want. You can't sit down and start broadcasting. But you can do that on YouTube, and you can do that on Facebook. And the reason you can do that, they're considered platforms. But if they are going to editorialize or remove content or feature content, they start to become more akin to a publisher. And if they're a publisher, they're not going to have these exemptions from the antitrust laws. So one of the things I see on Twitter all the time, Twitter's supposedly a platform, and Twitter's not responsible for all the defamatory stuff that goes on the platform. That's between the parties. One person says someone is a pedophile. The other person says these are defamation per se type of things. That's not Twitter's fault that one person defamed another on the platform. It's not Facebook's issue. It's not YouTube's, because they're not a publisher. But if a publisher goes on the platform and calls individuals names, and let's say they're not public figures, so it's easy to get them, and calls a private citizen a pedophile, the person's not, truth being a defense to defamation, then they can be sued very easily. So the issue is going to be with Facebook and YouTube is whether, they should maintain their platform status. If they want to maintain their platform status, then they're going to have to go back to open and free access to their platform, and they're going to have to cut back dramatically on their editorialization. What I see recently, like for example on Twitter, they used to have organically trending hashtags during the 2016 election. All it took was a group of people to gin up something they thought was funny. They put a hashtag and it start trending. Today it seems like they just select them, and not only do they select the hashtags, they publish the tweets that go with those hashtags. So what they have is you can tell they have a certain blue check mark brigade. So when they come up with their anti-Trump tweet of the day or hashtag of the day, they put the hashtag up, and then you see the same people behind the hashtag. Even if you block those people, they still show up under the hashtag, which means that's not a platform. A platform would mean if you have the ability to see what you want to see, publish what you want to publish, and follow who you want to follow, that's a platform. But when they publish a hashtag and you cannot block that content, that's no different than you not being able to block the front page of the New York Times. And why should you be able to block the front page of the New York Times? It's a publisher. If the New York Times wants to publish a front page, the only way you don't have to see it is you don't go to the front page and you don't look at it. But you can't not see the front page of a published New York Times newspaper or New York Times web page. Same with the Twitter hashtag. Same with the stuff that Facebook may put into your feed. Well, they're publishing that stuff. That's not a platform. They're putting it there, and there's nothing you can do to not see it. So they're publishing it, which makes them a publisher. Now, the other issue is going to be with Facebook is not only does Facebook have the same publisher issue that YouTube has, for antitrust purposes, they also have the fact that YouTube is the place to see videos. Well, Facebook arguably is more dominant in the sense that not only does it run Facebook and can boot people off Facebook, suspend people, but it also runs Instagram and WhatsApp. So there's going to be issues for Facebook. And again, this is political because if people really had a problem with this and there wasn't a time sensitivity with elections, people would just drift off of these platforms. So for example, I mean, no one wants to be, you don't need to be. Now here's the difference between a social media platform and a video platform and a auction platform. An auction platform, there's no advantage to being on a smaller platform. You want to be, the buyers want to be where the sellers are and the sellers want to be the buyers are. But on a social media platform, you're not benefiting from a platform that has 3 billion people on it. You'll never interact with a fraction of 1% of those people of that information. So there's really no benefit. What people do on social media, for the most part, what they want to see are what their interests are. So you self-select those. And generally, when you self-select your interests, you essentially don't want to see 99% of the other content on there. And then the other thing people generally want out of social media is not just to talk amongst themselves and their family and their friends and other people that think like them. They want to see the general news. Well, you don't need to be on Facebook to get that experience. There are smaller social media platforms. So Facebook will be able to argue that there's no barrier to entry in social media. The problem they're going to have, though, is the political problem. If they're deemed to be abusing their monopoly position for political, that's going to be the big argument with Facebook. So we've done Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Google, and YouTube. Today, one more, AT&T came. Now, they're not listed. AT&T is not listed in any of this. Here's a stone cold. I just want to show you the stone cold loser. AT&T is not listed today in any of the potential antitrust issues, but they do have an issue because Trump today tweeted out that he's got an issue with AT&T. Does anyone know what the issue with AT&T is? Well, AT&T owns CNN. And it looked like today Trump was calling for a boycott of AT&T. He's on his way to England. Just before he landed, he called Sadiq Khan a stone cold loser. But today he wrote, I believe that if people stop using or subscribing to AT&T, they would be forced to make big changes at CNN, which is dying in the ratings anyway. It's so unfair and such bad fake news. Why wouldn't they act? When the world watches CNN, it gets the false picture. So those are all the companies that are now in the crosshairs of Trump, and a lot of it's political. They are companies that have the ability to shape opinion, and opinion will determine who becomes president in 2020, so I think they're starting this now. Also, Trump is going against. He now has Bill Barr. He has Durham. He has Uber. He has Horowitz, all working on his team to find out a few things. Uber was the original guy who was appointed by, I'm recuse myself, Jeff Sessions, to look into a number of things like the FISA warrant applications and some of the Hillary Clinton issues. And it looked like he wasn't doing much. And apparently he, from people that were trying to find out what happened, the stuff they found out was he wasn't really engaged. And Barr actually admitted, at least with respect to the FISA stuff, that Sessions appears to have called him off and said, let's just let the Uber Horowitz, the Inspector General, take a look at this FISA stuff. Now, the problem with an Inspector General looking at something as opposed to a U.S. Attorney or a Special Attorney is an Inspector General does not have subpoena power. A special Inspector General is really just like an HR guy or woman at a bureau or an agency of the United States government. If you leave the bureau, then Horowitz can't contact you. It's only if you're working there can the HR person come up to you and say, what's going on? I got to ask a few questions. And you don't even have to answer the questions. Now, you might get fired if you don't answer the questions. But let's say you've got real serious information and you don't want to give it up. And Horowitz says, hey, I want you to come to my office and tell me everything you know about Peter Strzok. And you say, I don't feel like it. And you probably wouldn't even get fired and you could probably challenge it. So if people want to stonewall the HR guy, they can. You can't do that with a Attorney General, which is what Huber was or is and should have been doing. So it sounds like Barr, he said that Huber has not been active and Huber was on standby waiting for Horowitz, which sounds like a lot of foot dragging by, I'm accused myself, Jeff Sessions, the former Attorney General, because that's ass backwards. Yeah, sure, have the Inspector General find out a few things, do the groundwork, but really the Attorney General like Huber has got far greater ability to find out exactly what happened. And generally, time is of the essence in these types of things. Now, if you just have an issue, let's say, for example, the Inspector General wants to look into the amount of monies that are spent on expenses. But you don't need an Attorney General to go in there and start arresting people and paneling grand juries. The Inspector General is in there to find out, interview a lot of people, review the expense reports, and see if the agency has an issue with falsified expense reports. And then you'd bring in an attorney who may need to, or maybe the Inspector General doesn't find that there's any endemic issues in the agency, and you just drop it. And if there are issues, then you bring in the attorney. But in a case like this, where it's apparent that there were issues, they should have gone with the attorney. And Barr seemed to intimate that probably should have been the case, but wasn't the case. But now that Huber is looking at something to do with Hillary Clinton, and maybe he just started that, we don't know. So there's the past stuff with Hillary Clinton, how the Clinton email investigation was run, whether it was run properly. There's a lot of evidence that it wasn't. Comey was fired because of the way he ran that investigation. I'm not going to go into all the details there, but that's what Huber's going to come up with. So that's one part of the past. The other part of the past that's being looked at is the FISA abuse, which now it looks like Durham, the new Attorney General, is looking at all that and all the things that happened on the Russian investigation, which started almost coterminously with the end of the Clinton email investigation with some of the same characters. So that's what Durham is looking at now. That's the guy that Barr appointed. He is an attorney, so he's not an Inspector General. And we'll see where all that goes. But that's where Trump is right now. Looks like he has the Department of Justice looking at Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Google for antitrust, FTC violations perhaps. And then he's got the Department of Justice under Bill Barr also looking at Hillary Clinton, FISA abuse, all the things pertaining to the Russian investigation. I would actually say that Mueller should be investigated on how, I know it's investigating the investigators, but the way he ran that, and even how he was appointed is all suspect, but the way he ran that in that last press conference, none of that was above board. Mueller seemed to be concerned when he issued his report that the media wasn't responding to it correctly. That's not a prosecutor's issue. He put the information out there. If he wanted to make a finding of obstruction or any type of finding, he could have put it in his report. It had nothing to do with whether he was able to indict a sitting president. if he really felt strongly that there was something, he could have made a finding and said, look, I can't bring a case because I'm not allowed to. Or he could have made a finding and said, I'm not bound by this guidance that the Office of Legal Counsel has put together. He didn't do any of those things. He wanted to leave everything to innuendo. He didn't make a call on obstruction of justice. And then he comes out 10 days later. He never should have given that press conference because it wasn't a press conference. It was a statement because he didn't take any questions. And at the end of it, he said, don't even bother bringing me back to talk to you. So what was the point of him coming out and saying stuff? Only to stir up issues. And he tried to change the way people looked at his report by actually changing what the report actually said, because he made it sound like, oh, I would have charged Trump, but he didn't say it directly this way, but I'm just not allowed to because it would be unconstitutional under the Office of Legal Counsel's opinion. None of that's true. And if he really wanted to bring it, there was nothing stopping him, but he made it sound like he couldn't, his hands were tied, and now Congress, you're allowed to do this. And again, it's not his job, that he's part of the Department of Justice, to abdicate his prosecutorial authority over to Congress by innuendo or by direction, which is what he was doing. It was a very political thing. And he didn't answer any questions, so we don't know why the investigation took so long, when he knew there was no collusion. So you can tell that Trump knows a lot of all this. The Attorney General, the Department of Justice, the new people understand what happened, and we're just going to have to follow how all this plays out. But this is all time is of the essence, because Trump probably wants to get in place some type of orders on these tech giants so that he's worried about the dissemination of information. I don't think he's worried. I don't think he wants to break them up. I think he wants to get consent decrees so that they're obligated to either bring back certain accounts that they have booted off. I think the department is going to threaten them with changing their status. But this is definitely part and parcel of politics and law and setting the stage for 2020. Let's see what you guys think tomorrow. We've got a lot of gold and silver stories, a lot of crypto stories. Today, the market was interesting. We had a Bullard, St. Louis Fed President Bullard say, hey, we might have to do a rate cut, and boom, that stopped the carnage in the markets. Gold and silver already up a bit. Gold had a big day today. Gold was up a little bit more than silver. We're going to talk about all that tomorrow. I just want to get your comments now, and then we'll see tomorrow. But I'm not trying to cut your comments short. I'm just trying to cut myself short and see what you guys are thinking. If there's any comments or questions you want my attention, put SMAULGLD, and if it's highlighted, then I can get to it. Otherwise, I'm just going to scroll through the comments, see if there's anything interesting. You got Philip. It's always interesting to see Philip. And Ann and Pablo. Silver Rapture is new. Let's see. Does he talk or does he look at the chat? Yes, he does look at the chat. Thank you, Ann, for explaining the format of the program. All right. Chuck and Platt. What else do we have? Yeah, dangerously. You know, Philip wrote a comment. I'm going to show it. He wrote, Dems are not only stupid, they're dangerously stupid, and Google blocked that content. I guess the word stupid is a bad word, and you're not allowed to use it. I know retard is a bad word. Me saying this, you know what happens at the end of this program? And I shouldn't say these things because they'll downgrade the program. Somehow they've got software, after you upload it, they run through it and they listen for all those words. They listen to all the words, they transcribe it. And if those words are in there, it's suspect. So it's not as good content because I used the R word and the S word just now. So maybe there's like an exemption if you only use them sparingly, maybe using for instructive purposes. You're not actually a lot of cussing and swearing, that kind of stuff. They'll downgrade you as well. Now, what other comments do we have this evening? I'm going to pull up the Smaulgld fundraising page. It's always fun to fundraise. There it is. All your different ways of sending value to Smaulgld. Salivate Metal is here. Hello, Salivate. A multitude of gratitude. Okay. Salutations. We didn't talk about silver today, Sal. We didn't talk about any gold or silver or crypto. We only talked about these antitrust, FTC, and other issues relating to law and politics. Okay. What else do we have? Multitude. Roger Henley's here. You guys are talking crony capitalism. Yep, indeed, says Salivate Metal. What else? No questions for me here. Lots of comments about EOS, Litecoin. Okay, Fiona Whalen. Smaulgld, there is a need for an alternative to eBay. In the last year, they turned into a ripoff for the sellers. The fees are totally usurious. Yes, there may be a need for an alternative to eBay, but that alternative wouldn't be 16 alternatives. It would be one other alternative. Only because eBay, if what you're saying is correct, I'm never on eBay, but if the sellers feel that they don't get a fair shake on eBay, they'll leave. And then the eBay won't be the dominant platform. But I actually believe that it's natural to have a dominant platform in something like auctions. So it's not natural for there to be a dominant restaurant. And the reason for that is it's good to have. It's a good thing. So if you got an Italian restaurant, you got a French restaurant, you got a Thai restaurant, you got all the restaurants in the town where the 1% are going to eat, they're not really going to knock each other out of business because of the vagaries of taste. Some people like to have the French food. They like to eat the frogs. They like to eat the frog legs. There's people who like the Thai food. There's people who like a little spicy Mexican food. And then there's people who like the Russian food. The Trump supporters. All right. So then you're not going to get a natural competition leading to one dominant restaurant tour, as Bernie was indicating there. All right. What else do we got? Anything else? Lots of comments, but nothing directly for me. And we're going to have to turn it back over to Bernie. All right. Bernie's going to give you the 10-second countdown. And if there are no more further comments or questions, we will say goodnight. And tomorrow I hope to catch up on the gold. There's some good gold and silver and crypto stories. We just didn't get to them. And we also didn't get a chance. I was ready to talk about on Sunday night, Solid Gold Sunday with Smaulgld, but YouTube wasn't working last night, about how gold keeps silver honest. So I've got some historical information on that. We'll hit that on Sunday. We'll get to the news stories on gold and silver tomorrow and on crypto. So Bernie, give us a 10-second countdown.
Okay, so first of all, you need to send your money to Lewis because he's not part of the 1%. And if you are, you owe him the money. Otherwise, I'm going to tax you 95%. So let's start from the top. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1%, 0. Have a good night.
All right. Thank you, Bernie. Have a good night. Have a good night, everyone. Mugging for life.